Sorry, the video and audio quality isn't going to be best on this, but before we start this video, I'd just like to say thank you so much for 500 subscribers. It's been a big journey and there's more to come. So enjoy this video and more content in the future. Thanks again. G'day guys, how are you? My name is Skipper. Welcome back to another video. And Sir Doug Nichols round is right around the corner. That means it's time to rank every single club's Indigenous jumper, because there's a few bangers here and there's a few that are a bit meh. Also, just a disclaimer, this is no disrespect to the stories behind these jumpers, as they have some very deep meanings. This is purely based on my opinion and how I think the jumper looks. Let's get straight into the video. So in last place, I've got Carlton, my club. Now it's still a pretty good jumper. Obviously the story about it's there as well. Oval down the bottom is meant to represent a footy, and the three lines above it are meant to represent Indigenous players, past, present and future. And it's also just meant to represent the cultural journey for Carlton going forward. But it's a pretty clean jumper, but I think there is better on the list. So let's go to 17th. Now, 17th, I've got Collingwood. This is still a pretty clean jumper, but compared to the others, I just think it isn't as detailed, which is no disrespect to the artist. I just think there's better jumpers, but I know the footprints are meant to have something to do with the connection to life, and I think the connection to the suburb of Collingwood too. It's a really nice jumper. I love the design in general, but I think there's just better. Like the Carlton one, I think there's just better on the list. So let's get to number 16. Now, 16th, we've got Brisbane. Now, this isn't a bad jumper either. I just think it looks a little bit messy for my liking, and I can't sort of see it as a Brisbane jumper apart from the colours. But the story behind this one is those like swirls in the jumper. Those are meant to be 4 connecting rivers, the Fitzroy, the Yarra, the Brisbane River, and I've blanked out, but I'll put it on the screen here. That's meant to represent the 4 connecting rivers and how that also leads back to the club connecting as a community. And that circle in the middle is meant to represent the sunrise. Overall, a pretty good jumper, but once again, there's still better on this list, but overall, still pretty clean. Can't wait to see Brisbane run out in it. Now, at 15th, I've got Geelong. Once again, the home jumper, the blue jumper, I actually really like, but the thing about the white jumper, I'm not a big fan of the darker hoops. I know that's how the Geelong's jumper is. I just think the blue one looks a little bit cleaner, which might make the ranking go down a few points, which is why I've got it so low. But the colours of the jumper are meant to represent the area of Geelong. And you've obviously got that snake in the jumper as well. And the little designs that I was talking about earlier, each of the designs in the hoops are meant to represent a sibling in the Humphreys family. This jumper was obviously designed by the sister of Lawson Humphreys. And overall, pretty good jumper. I like the blue one more than the white one, but still pretty good jumper overall. And at 14th, I've got Port Adelaide. Now, this is a pretty clean jumper too, but I know the teal part of the jumper has meaning, and that's why it's so small, but I still can't get around about how small the teal is. This was designed by Gavin Wanganeen, former Port player obviously, and played for Essendon as well. The petals, I like to call them petals because they look a little bit like flower petals. That's meant to represent the Milky Way, the galaxy, not the bar. And the white dots in the V are meant to represent every player that's played for Port Adelaide. And like I said before, the little teal V that's in the jumper is meant to represent every single First Nations player that's played for the club. Overall, pretty nice jumper, pretty nice meaning. I just think there's some better designs, which is, once again, No offense to Gavin Wanganeen. Now, at 12th, I've got Sydney. Now, obviously, they had a similar one last year, but there's a lot more detail on this one, I reckon. It's a bit more full with detail. I'm just personally a big fan of this red over white. It's like their clash, which I like. There's also a hint to their history of South Melbourne and moving over to Sydney as well. That's what I could pick up from the meanings. But overall, still a pretty clean jumper. I like how they've brought in the inverse again, and still a pretty good jumper in my opinion. Now at 12th, I've got Essendon. This is their Dreamtime jumper, and I think it's really, really cool. It's pretty clean as well. There's not much to it. I think the sash, from what I read, is meant to be a gum tree, and there's also other little Indigenous patterns around the jumper, but I think this is just a really clean jumper. Obviously, the sash, I like the little waves. I love it when Indigenous jumpers incorporate waves in their jumpers. I just think it looks really clean. They're coming up against Richmond, who you might see later in this list. Just a nice looking jumper. I don't have too much to say about it, but this will look pretty cool at the MCG on Thursday night next week. At 11th, I've got GWS. Now, once again, they had a similar design last year, but they've done a colour switch. Instead of charcoal, they've gone for white. And I do like this sort of cross-hatching. The overall meaning is meant to represent the connection to the club and the community. Colours look nice. I actually preferred the charcoal, but the white's still pretty cool and still a pretty nice jumper. Now at 10th, I've got Gold Coast, and I quite like their Darwin jumper more than their other jumper. Obviously, that's this one, and it's still pretty cool. But what brings them up so much is their Darwin jumper. This looks really, really clean in my opinion. The white behind the Gold Coast logo is meant to represent the sun, and the boomerangs around it are meant to represent guidance and strength. But I absolutely loved watching Gold Coast in Darwin last week, putting this on. It looked really clean against the Bulldogs, who we'll also get to later. The other jumper as well, I couldn't find out much meaning for it because it didn't show up on the Gold Coast website. I'm pretty sure it was reused from last year. But both pretty good jumpers. I prefer the Darwin one in my opinion. And Gold Coast have cooked with their Darwin jumper again this year. Now at 9th, I've got Adelaide. Now this jumper was designed by former Crows player Graham Johncock, and this has a very deep connection to his family, this jumper. I was going to put this lower, but this jumper's sort of grown on me after a little bit. The crow looks pretty clean. That's a message of it. That's a representation of his late mother. The smaller crows are meant to represent his grandparents. Overall, I love the colours, and I love the little designs here and there as well. It just looks really, really clean. Adelaide always do a pretty good job with their Indigenous jumpers, so I'm not surprised, and they've done a great job again this year. Now, at 8th, I've got North Melbourne, and I'm a big fan of the blue that's in this jumper. I absolutely love... I've loved every single North jumper over the past couple of years. They've been cooking with their jumpers, man. The representation on this jumper is meant to be something like a possum skin cloak, which spans from the front and back of the jumper. Obviously, this jumper was designed by Auntie Joy, who has had a significant impact on North Melbourne's Indigenous involvement over the past couple of years. But this is overall a pretty clean jumper, and it'd be great to see North Melbourne get a win in this jumper. Now, at 7th, I've got Melbourne. This jumper was designed by Cozzy Pickett's father. Personally, I love the colours. I love the little detail on the yoke. The shield in the middle is meant to represent the players who are being represented as warriors. The blue on that jumper, I told you I'm a sucker for blue. It's my favourite colour, but it's just such a nice colour, and I love the little details behind the colours as well. Overall, a pretty clean jumper. Let's move on to the next jumper. Now, might be controversial, but I've got the Bulldogs at 6th. I don't know how many times I have to say it, I absolutely love blue in jumpers. It's just such a good colour, but I know it doesn't, I said earlier that Brisbane's jumper didn't look like a Bulldogs jumper. this doesn't necessarily look like a Bulldogs jumper, but I can still identify the Bulldogs in this jumper. Obviously, the story behind it is all the sections of the jumper are meant to represent a different part of Australia. So Central Australia, Victoria, Western Australia, etc. And another nice little touch is there's exactly 100 white dots on the jumper, which is meant to represent the club's 100-year anniversary. Obviously, we're seeing a couple clubs implement little sentiments to their 100 years, obviously, because you got North Melbourne, the Bulldogs, and Hawthorn all celebrating 100 years. But overall, I think the Dogs have done a pretty good job with this jumper, and looks pretty nice. Now, at 5th place, I've got Richmond, the other Dreamtime team. The centerpiece of this jumper in the sash is the bird, which is known as the mutton bird, or the moon bird, as some people would call it as well. That's meant to represent the family and culture of the Richmond community and Indigenous people. And the other details in the sash are meant to represent the elements of fire, water, smoke, and I think wind as well. Obviously, Richmond has a big connection with Indigenous players. It's the 10th anniversary of Dreamtime at the G, so that'll be pretty special. I'm pretty sure they'll have a special logo on both Richmond and Essendon's jumpers. Personally, I love the yellow Richmond jumpers. It's a pretty cool jumper, but I reckon they're still better. Now, at 4th place, I've got Fremantle. Obviously, oh my god, they finally properly bring back the classic Fremantle colours. I know they sort of hinted to it in last year's Indigenous jumper, but it's actually cool to see that they've properly, fully included it in the design. I just love it, man. I'm gushing over it. I love those Freo colours from back in the day. But this was designed by Jeff Farmer, the first Indigenous player to kick over 400 goals. Obviously, like I said, the colours of the V's, or the chevrons, are a callback to his time at Fremantle and the jumper that he debuted in. And they're also a representation of rivers. I didn't have too much to say about this jumper, but it's just so clean. I love the colours. I love the designs of the chevrons, and it's just a pretty clean Indigenous jumper overall. Jeff Farmer did a fantastic job. Now, at 3rd, I've got Hawthorn. They've obviously got a brown and a gold design, but this is clean. I love the hawk in the middle. The middle stripe is meant to represent the players of the club and them pushing forward. The left stripe, which you can see has 13 circles, is meant to represent the club's 13 premierships. And the right of the jumper has 5 circles, which is meant to represent every home ground that the club's ever played at. I love the hawk in the middle, like I said. If I were to choose between one, I'd probably say the gold one is a bit better in my opinion, but they're both still really cool. Overall, Hawthorn have done a great job, and it's going to be really cool to see Jack Ginnivan running out in this jumper. At 2nd place, I've got St Kilda. And this jumper is really special because it was designed by Messiah Wanganeen Millera. Obviously, he's doing fantastic at the moment. And he's got First Nations heritage as well. This is so cool. I mentioned earlier with the Essendon jumper how I love waves in jumpers. And they have it here again. I love the little patterns, but you've also got the 3 big circles. The one in the centre representing the suburb of Moorabbin, and the other 2 representing cultural groups who have been supporting Wanganeen Millera since the beginning of his journey. Obviously, St Kilda don't have the Indigenous colours on their jumper anymore, but I don't think that's a bit of an issue. I think they still represent the Indigenous community pretty fine here. And they've done a pretty good job with Indigenous jumpers for a while now. If I had the money right now, I would probably actually buy this jumper. A lot of these jumpers, I would be rushing to the AFL store. So yeah, overall, I love this jumper, but I just think there's one better, which you've probably figured out by now. And at number 1, if you couldn't tell already, I've got the West Coast Eagles. Some people might find this controversial, but the eagle on that jumper looks awesome! I couldn't find a meaning for the eagle, but the kangaroo and the emu in the jumper that you can see are meant to represent the club moving forward. Not that they'll be doing that anytime soon. Joking. I know some people don't like the white eagle in the middle, but honestly I think it works really well. The colours are also fantastic. Overall, I think West Coast have done an amazing job with this jumper. And if I weren't a Carlton fan, I'd probably buy this one. That is it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Obviously, I'm getting content back out more again. Don't forget to put a comment below. It helps me a lot. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe as well. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.